After days of mounting pressure for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, the Home Secretary Suella Braverman has finally been sacked. It's fair to say she's been a controversial figure throughout her time in not only this government, but Liz Truss's government before that. Let's take a look back at some of her most controversial moments. On the 4th of November, the Home Secretary issued a tweet in which she said that for some people who sleep rough living in a tent, that was a lifestyle choice. The Home Secretary had planned to make it illegal for some charities to hand out tents to rough sleepers or to fine them in some cases. Also, a plan for the authorities to take tents away from rough sleepers in cities across England and Wales, because she didn't want to see tent cities that had sprung up in places such as San Francisco or Los Angeles. She said that when you get a tent city, it leads to squalor, it leads to drug taking, and it leads to more crime. But 15 leading homelessness charities had written to the Home Secretary urging her to reverse the plans that she'd put in motion. 4 days later, the Home Secretary then issued another very inflammatory statement in which he said that the pro-Palestine marches and protests that had been taking place on a weekly basis in London were not just protests, that they were hate marches. She then doubled down even further when she wrote an opinion piece for the Times newspaper in which she said that the police were showing bias to certain protest groups and that they were getting preferential treatment. Now, the police are meant to operate completely free of any sort of political interference. And so political opponents to Suella Braverman had called for her to stand down for potentially breaking the ministerial code. Back in September, Suella Braverman was on an international trip to Washington, D.C., where she was speaking to a think tank about migration. And in that speech, she said that multiculturalism had failed in this country. Now, that raised quite a lot of eyebrows because Suella Braverman herself is the daughter of two immigrants who moved to the UK from Kenya and from Mauritius, and again were seen as a highly emotive topic that she was speaking out on. Of course, it wasn't the first time that the Home Secretary had talked about migration in strong terms. In March this year, she said that there were huge numbers of migrants willing to come over to the UK. First saying that it was within the tens of millions, and then later on saying that there was billions of people who wanted to come over here. But she used very strong language one more time in which she warned of a hurricane of migrants trying to come over to the UK. Again, something which was condemned by charities, by groups on the left of the political spectrum for what they said was dangerous language that was being uttered by one of the holders of the great offices of state. Of course, this isn't the first time that the Home Secretary has been sacked. In the dying days of the Liz Truss government, Liz Truss had to sack Suella Braverman at the time because of her use of a private email server. Today, we heard from the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, who says after everything that happened under Liz Truss, Suella Braverman should never have been given a job again.
Let's not forget that the last time that Suella Braverman was sacked as Home Secretary, it was because of a national security leak that she was responsible for 5 days before Rishi Sunak reappointed her as Home Secretary. So I'm afraid his spectacular misjudgment, his poor judgment, and his weakness in tolerating Suella Braverman for so long is entirely to blame.
After Suella Braverman was sacked, she took to Twitter and said that it had been the honour of her life to have served as Home Secretary and that she was going to have more to say on the matter in due course. I think it's clear that Suella Braverman is not going to go away quietly. Her allies are absolutely furious that she's no longer part of the cabinet. They are planning to hold a meeting later on in Parliament in which they're going to discuss everything that has taken place, plus potentially look at what a future leadership bid would look like from the former Home Secretary. And that's something which could worry the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Remember, when he was in number 11 as Chancellor, it had been widely seen that he was planning himself to launch a leadership bid against Boris Johnson. pointing to the fact that he'd put his signature on various promotional materials. Also, he was quite popular with his Eat Out to Help Out scheme. All of this was denied by Rishi Sunak, but he will know all too well the political risks of having somebody so close to you planning to take your job.